to you all. Thank you for that introduction, Tanny. Very much appreciate you all taking the time this afternoon to listen to this presentation and get an overview of microlearning. Hopefully you find it informative and get out of it what you've intended to get out of it, the key knowledge you need to know about microlearning. It's a real fascinating topic, microlearning, something which I'm really fascinated about because it particularly ponders three main things, being science, technology, and innovation. And in this day and age, those three things coming together to help improve safety performance overall, I think you'll all agree, is a wonderful combination and something we always want to see together. We often see as HSE professionals, as I spent a large percentage of my early career in that role, in those kinds of roles, always looking for ways to innovate, always looking for ways to improve safety performance, and just seeing something which was empirically driven, empirically researched is something really important. And that's where microlearning is fascinating, because it really is something that has some science behind it, and we'll take you through that in the next 20 minutes or so, and hopefully you'll see some benefit in your own organisations from microlearning. I might just start off though with a little bit of a let's establish a need sort of question. So I know as safety professionals, you've all been to incident investigations in your careers, as I have, and all too often you'd find causal factors relating back to competency or training, lack of training, no training. And, you know, that's a common trait, I'm sure you'll all agree. And I think to refine that even further, I'm sure that you've all come across from time to time, even instances when you've really put it under the microscope, the accident investigations, the investigations where training's a causal factor. Some instances where perhaps the training had been provided to the individuals in the past, but for some reason they just didn't actuate those learnings, that knowledge from that training. Or indeed they'd forgotten about those learnings from that training. I'm sure that many of you have come across that. And that's why I refer to this presentation as a bit of a game of inches, because where microlearning plays is in that, why do people forget? And what can we do to make sure they don't forget? They get the most out of the training as it pertains to safety performance and safety related skills and abilities. And that's what we're going to explore here for the next little while. Clearly, to get safety performance where we want it, we'll all agree it's a journey. It's a real struggle. There's a lot of attributes or mechanisms we have to put into trying to achieve an optimized safety performance. Sometimes we might call it target zero or you know, searching for zero incidents, zero harm, etc. But there's a lot of mechanisms, a lot of strategies that we put into place to achieve whatever that target is that we're trying to achieve. And those things might be systems, they might be risk management measures, behavioural focus, leadership focuses, engineering and design focus. And we all agree, I'm sure we do, that training and competency is one key measure, one key mechanism, one key strategy we all have as companies to try to get to that optimised result around safety performance, whether it be zero harm or whatever your own internal policy and strategy is. So it's inescapable. Training is one of the overall strategies we have as companies to try to achieve that elusive target. And, you know, we need to look at how we're doing that as organisations. We need to look at ways we can optimise that spend into training, because we all have budgets around training, whether it be safety related training or leadership training. We're all putting effort into training which is trying to achieve safety outcomes for us and get us to that target. So we should be really looking at that very closely. What are we actually getting out of that training? What's our return on investment? Are we optimizing our spend and our efforts? Because I think a lot of us probably think if we're sending someone to training, particularly if it's safety related training, you know, we're doing so because we've made an assessment that they need training, those specialized staff members of ours. So we want to get the result out of it. We want to optimize the knowledge retention. So that's why I refer to it as a game of inches. And we might, you know, just putting a general target there of 25% training and competency. A lot of businesses, they spend about 25% of their safety budget around training. Sometimes it might not be in the actual safety department's budget, but certainly costs there around 25%. And a lot of money also is probably wasted from the knowledge retention, the retention rate side of things. You'd be probably very shocked to know that as little as 10% of knowledge is retained from when you send your personnel to safety training. And one of the themes, or one of the topics I'll use throughout this presentation will be the analogy of confined space entry training, obviously a very important safety-related training topic. And a lot of companies send their personnel to safety training relating to confined space entry. For you, it might be work at heights, it might be fire training, it might be first aid, CPR. It doesn't really matter what the topic is, but I'm going to use that one as an example. So just talking about the return on investment. So if you take it, for example, a standard confined space entry course that you might send your people to, you've decided that you send your people to confined space entry training for one real purpose, and that's for them to receive the knowledge they need to be able to work in a confined space safely, to be able to protect themselves from injury, from hazards, and to protect their co-workers from injury and hazards. And when you send someone to training, you might spend $200 per person. The price has changed, it's irrelevant. For the purposes of just easy mathematics, we'll call it $200 per person. And that's just the course costs, right? There's also non-productive time costs. You've got to replace that person in their job to do their duties for that day while they're attending training. There might be travel costs, there might be accommodation costs, meal costs, so on and so forth, maybe day rate costs. So $200 is a real low level actually in terms of the actual investment that you put into that person going to that training. So if you knew before you sent that person to that $200 worth of training that they were likely to only retain 10% or $20 of value of that from putting them into that training, and you knew it was safety critical training, would you still send them there? It's a question I want you to ask yourself, because one thing we know for sure from the very important topic of cognitive neuroscience and how people learn is that it's very likely to be a wasted investment. And this is a pretty hard thing for me to say because I actually own a training organization. But what drives me is ways of doing it better so we can optimize that return on investment. So if you're sending someone to a safety critical training like confined space entry and it's costing you $200 raw cost, but you're only getting $20 return, there's something wrong, isn't there? I think you'll all agree there's something wrong. We're not optimizing how we train people, and we need to do something different. So to put it another way, if you send someone to that confined space entry course and there was, say, 10 topics, legislation, work plan development, site emergency procedures, confined space hazards, how to work with a standby person, call it 10 topics again, just for ease of description. If you knew that they were likely to only retain knowledge around 2 of those 10 topics 1 week later, how would you feel about that? I think you would agree that it would be viewed as very clearly not optimized and a bit of a waste of money, and you're not getting the desired outcome, i.e. the main purpose was to send them to the training to receive the knowledge they need to perform the job safely. So one of our weapons in the fight to get to where we want to from a safety performance point of view is failing us. And it's failing us because of what is called the curve of forgetting. And unfortunately, we haven't really evolved too much in the way we train people. The good news is there's new mechanisms, scientifically proven mechanisms which can aid us. But the curve of forgetting, which is was sort of discovered and elaborated upon back in the 1880s by Hermann Ebbinghaus, basically found that when a person goes into, for example, a one-day confined space course, typically within 7 days, so time plays a really important role in this, within 7 days, they've lost 90% of that knowledge they received from attending that training course, that training package. The curve really starts to drop off, as you can see in this image in front of you. And that's disconcerting. Again, as a safety professional, we're not achieving the results we need. We play a big role with our training professionals in organizations, our learning professionals in our organizations, to do risk analysis, to do a training needs analysis, allocate spend, allocate ticks in the boxes for our people to have from a training point of view. And it's disconcerting to see that we're getting not enough knowledge retention, therefore safety performance out of our training spent. So basically, we do need a bit of a paradigm shift in the way we train. I think you all agree. We need to get better ROI from what we're investing in our people. We need to change using the science of neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, evolving from single day, one and done type training packages, training outcomes, to more of a longer term journey using things such as microlearning. This is where I'll get into what microlearning is a little bit more. Treating training as day one of a perennial program, a program that doesn't really end. Now that might seem a bit overburdensome or whatever, but when you hear what microlearning can do, which I'll extrapolate on very shortly, it won't be overbearing, it won't be overburdensome. So what is microlearning? Some of you may already know, and I respect and appreciate that. This might be, secondhand information for you, or double up. But it's basically, microlearning is basically a holistic approach to skill-based learning and education, which deals with relatively small learning units, and those learning units can vary in terms of the way they're applied. It involves a short-term focus strategy, especially designed for skill-based understanding, learning and education. It refers to micro perspectives of learning, education, training and skill development. Now, I call these things sparks, and together with our software business that we work with, we've developed many different mechanisms, many different pathways to deliver sparks to these personnel who attend training such as Confined Space. Now, basically those can be delivered via phone, via email, web applications, so on and so forth. They can be things such as short quizzes, challenge questions, little video clips around the training. So for example, if it was a Confined Space course, there might be a short video clip around about what the role of a standby person is. Safety alerts, which is really handy for organisations who already have a good safety alert procedure and policy and standard in place, and they use that well. Email alerts, text messages, other meaningful, keyword meaningful, interactive instances. And one key thing we've learned from microlearning is it's not necessarily the length of time, it's just the fact that meaningful information is coming to people that impacts positively on their ability to retain that knowledge. So things such as sparks of information. So you have a person who finish his or her Confined Space course on Monday. On the Tuesday or the Wednesday, they'll receive a spark of information. And one really good thing to do around these sparks of information is, particularly in the competency-based regime, the person, when they do their theory and practical assessment in the accredited regime for the Confined Space course, there might be some elements they got wrong. Isn't it a good way to then take those elements they got wrong, the assessment elements they got incorrect, and put those back to them? Because as one of my trainers quite often tells me, it's not the things they get right that bothers me, Michael, it's the bits they get wrong. And he's dead right. If a person leaves, even under a competency-based regime, they'll leave the training, go into their workplace, start to work in a confined space setting. And if they're acting in that capacity and they're trying to, they're getting they got a question wrong in their exam, in their assessment, maybe they're applying it wrong in the workplace, and that's not obviously what we want. So that's where, again, sparks and microlearning play a fantastic role in, taking that piece of information and helping them get it right next time, so that they're getting that information all the time. So 24 hours after attending a course, they'll get some sparks of information, critical, meaningful information around the course of Confined Space. Then again, 48 hours later, a week later, a month later, and so on and so forth. And what this does is it enriches the learning experience and causes a compounding of the knowledge retention. So what you can see here from this image here around the curve of forgetting is, you might remember a little bit earlier in this presentation, you get the blue drop off, right? So day one, the individual has done the course, they're at their height of knowledge retention from the course. But as every day passes, they've lost that knowledge. And after a month, they're down to 90%, as low as 90%. Different studies, they might show 80% loss, 70% loss, but 90% is the worst case scenario. And that's what I care about, and that's what you probably care about too, is the worst case scenario and how we can optimize knowledge retention, therefore safety performance. but through administering sparks of information, little YouTube clips, little surveys, little safety alerts, emails, so on and so forth, particularly ones related to their workplace. This is where really tailoring sparks of information to the people in your workplace, relevant settings, is really useful. What you do is you're taking basically that information they've been receiving from their short-term memory and helping them put it into their long-term memory. Your brain is wired in a way where it keeps information it uses and it disperses of it when you don't use it. And if you think about it, it's quite logical, right? The brain can only take so much, so therefore it's developed over time these mechanisms, like a sponge, of use it or lose it. And that's a phrase coined by another professor in this space, Dr. Art Cohn. I recommend you look at some of his work around knowledge retention, the curve of forgetting, and the cognitive neuroscience that surrounds this whole piece. The sparks of information specifically put into the curve at right intervals will boost people's knowledge retention very significantly, up to 80% knowledge retention. So 8 times what the worst case scenario is on the blue curve. And that's a fabulous outcome. It's still not where we want to be, clearly. Obviously, the holy grail here is 100% knowledge retention, because that means the employees can take that knowledge from the training and administer it holistically, safely in their workplace setting. But at least it's definitely a track in the right direction. I'm sure you'll all agree. Okay, so traditional teaching versus microlearning, and this is where it's, microlearning is taking the science a whole step further. And there's only a couple more slides here, guys, and then I'll be happy to take some more questions to dig deeper into the science behind this and perhaps methodologies we can use. But basically, typical settings right now that we're faced with is you send someone to their confined space course, as an example, and that's typically an accredited course. It's a half-day theory, it's a half-day practical, and that's fine, right? Death by PowerPoint. I'm sure you've already heard that before. And that's one of the reasons why we're getting such a poor level of knowledge retention. So we're taking that approach, which you can't escape under the current ways that we deliver training here in Australia, mandated by ASQA, kind of stuck in the old school world. We still have to do that if we're looking for accredited training outcomes, sadly. But you can augment, you can enrich that by applying micro-learning techniques following the traditional learning process. And I highly recommend to you, if and when you look at microlearning as one of the weapons in your arsenal to go after the safety performance side of things, that you look at platforms which integrate with accredited learning, because they can help automate things a lot better for you and take the labor out of evolving into a microlearning environment, a continuous learning environment. So that's really important for us to just ponder. So, as I said before, microlearning is just one part of the overall strategy. We've got engineering controls, we've got risk management controls, we've got a plethora of controls and mechanisms and strategies to try to improve safety performance. And that's keeping in perspective the historical side of things, where we've come from, 100 years ago to where we are now. The future is about technology, it's about innovation, it's about going away from these fadistic ideas and into science-based, innovative ideas. Microlearning is certainly one. It's based on cognitive neuroscience, it's empirically proven, and that's why it plays a small part, an inch, in the overall marathon for your overall strategy in trying to achieve safety performance that you're trying to achieve, whether it be target zero or whatever it is in your own organisation. Now, today, you're sitting here in mid-September. Some of you will be in budget rounds and planning rounds for 2019, sorry. Some of you might be in tax seasons. But I encourage you to think about microlearning and how it could possibly play a role for you in the 2019 planning season. I think from where I sit, I see a real place for it, particularly where so many incidents, as we already pondered at the very get-go from this presentation, do have a foundation, have a causal factor in lack of training, forgetting what they've learned, these sorts of factors. So I guess that's the presentation, short and sharp, gives you food for thought. There's further information I can also provide to you individually if you'd like further information around the cognitive neuroscience and microlearning. Also equally, happy to take questions right now around this topic. I think questions will be put via text, if I'm correct here, Tanny, and then I can answer them live or even respond to them too. Looks like there's no open questions, so perhaps if anyone would like to put any questions into the Q&A section, there's a little bar above, up high, and you can put any questions you want in there, guys. For many of you, this might be the first time you've actually used this webinar feature, so it might be tricky, but up above where there's the Q&A, there we go. So question here from Adam, is any good papers on microlearning that you'd recommend? Yeah, there is. There's quite a few actually. I think the best thing I can do there, Adam, is if I can get your email address, I can send them directly to you. I have a question here from Barbara Bashina. Hopefully I've got that correct, Barbara. Is it possible to get 100% knowledge retention? Oh, that's a great question. As I've mentioned probably when I was talking around slide 14, it's certainly the holy grail, Barbara. It's what we all want to get to. I think if you wanted 100% knowledge retention, you have to spend nearly your entire life focusing in on just that one topic. So it'd probably be a bit of a story of diminished returns. But certainly with the technology we have available to us now with microlearning and it based on cognitive neuroscience, we really have a great opportunity to significantly get closer to that target. So to get us from 10% right now up to 80%, which is, I think, a fabulous outcome in itself. So Kelly has got a question here, and hopefully I'm answering Adam and Barbara's questions correctly as I'm going, appropriately I should say. Kelly's question here is, what would you recommend the most successful methodologies for microlearning might be? Another good question. So the science around this and the evidence we have from the research we've seen is that video is a really good methodology to put forward microlearning sparks to people. Simple surveys are also very good. A lot of the blue-collar workforce work really well with video, so I think that's one of the most successful methodologies. But they all play a role. They all play a role, and you've got to really take into consideration your workforce. I've got a question here from Pippa. What are the typical forms of Spark training you feel are most opportunistic, and how do you feel about the wave of e-learning? Forms of Spark learning. Spark learning is the typical forms we've seen are like an application survey, web-based surveys, web-based emails, videos via link. They're the typical forms of Spark training that I've seen and that I've been involved with. Pippa, I find them also very good. I think what's going to happen also, Pippa, is over the next 5 years, you're going to see a proliferation in this space. Australia is a little bit behind the curve when it comes to the US. There is for your information, guys, there is a conference coming up in late October in the US called DevLearn. Some of you may be familiar with it. I really do recommend you have a look at it. It's the sort of conference that has 17 plenaries going on simultaneously. Heck, a lot of really good content. I'm there again this year, 4 years in a row for me going there. It's a fantastic forum. And to your question about the wave of e-learning, Pippa, it talks a lot about that conference is filled with content around e-learning. But your question more specifically about the wave of e-learning, it's about what you're prepared to put into it, Pippa. You know, I find a lot of companies, they really want to go cheap and cheerful when it comes to e-learning content, and that doesn't really lend itself to immersive type learning. And, you know, so a lot of the e-learning content I see at the moment doesn't even have voiceover. So if you've got people with LLN issues, literacy, language and numeracy issues, they're really not going to go very well with that e-learning. So, you know, there's lots of different ways to do e-learning that include gamification. There's methods that include animation and so forth. And the more challenging, the more interactive and immersive you make it, certainly that adds a lot of value to the e-learning side of things. Another question there from Kelly. You'll be next, Bjelke. Also the best assessment methods. If you're talking about whether, I probably need to clarify that with you, Kelly. Are you talking about online assessment methods or competency-based assessment methods as opposed to theory and practical? Probably not, might explore. Might come back to that, Kelly, and just answer Bjelke's there. Bjelke, your question is quite a long one. I'll try my best to answer it. I have an issue with being told that we have to undertake annual refresher, confined space, work at heights, etc. And it doesn't seem to improve practices. Do the regulators and those approving those courses understand that at times it's just ticking the compliance box? It sometimes feels a little like that. For example, to undertake a refresher course every year when you've already completed 10 first aid courses prior turns the brain off automatically. Look, what are my thoughts? I'll probably be a little bit controversial here, a little bit challenging to the businesses out there. I wouldn't look at the regulator in this one. I'd be looking more at businesses, more at companies, what they're prepared to do and what they're prepared to invest in. Because, for a training company, it's easy to put together a course program where there's a critical mass and there's enough people to validate and it being, commercially viable. When you come into refreshers, there's a lot less people who need that training. So if you're a training provider and you put in a sophisticated training program for refreshers that really adds value, that's not just repeating what you did in the initial course, that's immersive, that has maybe VR or other elements to it, then you're going to have to heighten your price for that because there's a lot less market there. But companies out there don't seem to want to pay that extra amount. So therefore, it just becomes a bit of a race to the bottom of the barrel. So if there was more safety professionals working with training companies to demand higher quality, I think you'd see a big paradigm shift there. But until that happens, it's pretty hard for training companies to put together a sophisticated training program around refreshers because the market just won't come to it. So it's really up to businesses to demand more. And one thing I'd encourage safety professionals to do, like yourselves, together with your training departments, is to go meet your training companies, to go audit them, get to know what they're doing. Make sure that they're delivering quality outcomes, delivering quality training, that they've already immersing new ways, new innovations, new technologies into their training programs, because it really is, you're already budgeting for it, you're already paying for this training. So it's about you guys getting the most out of it. Kelly, your question was, thanks for clarifying that. Also the best assessment methods, online please, and competency-based. Well, again, it's about, there's many different approaches. So if you're doing online competency-based, it's pretty hard to do online competency-based. I've seen some online competency-based programs which are pretty ordinary, frankly. It's pretty hard to do an online competency-based program because you're basically doing it through video. The assessor's not even there, can't see the whole picture. So it's really hard to do. You can certainly do an online theoretical assessment, and there's great ways to do that are gamified, that are quizzical, that really are immersive. But online competency-based, you really should look at that very closely and think about whether or not you're getting a real true competency-based outcome. Hopefully that answers your question, Kelly, and I'd be happy to talk offline if you want to explore that a bit more, because it is quite a complex and important topic. Zin, does the curve of forgetting only apply to theory-based training rather than a practical hands-on training? No, it applies to both. Certainly theoretical is less immersive, therefore the amount of knowledge captured into your brain is less likely to stick compared to practical, because we do process information and training better if it is done practical. But the curve of forgetting still applies. It still applies. If it's not using it post the course, you will start to lose it. Have a question here from Jeff. If you have a heavily compliance-based training workforce, is there a danger of swamping the workers with training content? Do people target micro-learning everywhere or at high risk? It's a great question, Jeff. They've all been good questions, actually. You really do need to pick and choose, particularly early on when you're making this innovation part of your overall safety strategy. You want adoption within your workforce. So you do want to pick those of the higher risk nature, at least early on, to immerse them in to get successes. So I would recommend very much strongly for you, Jeff, if you are looking at microlearning and you do have a compliance-based need, and the thing you've got to look at there too is that obviously it's a compliance-based need because government or your company sees it as such high importance, but I would look at the higher risk ones for you too. And that makes perfect sense. I mean, everything we do in our safety programs is risk-based, isn't it? So it makes perfect sense that you adapt your microlearning approach, particularly in the early days when you're trying to get take-up in that manner. We have a question here from Pippa. The health industry is already in free fall with limited funds and training is seemingly being reduced and cut back, not to mention in aged care, the number of NESB persons with skills other than care. Any thoughts on innovations on a budget, given what you have just highlighted to Bjelke real-world strategies? Well, from a microlearning point of view, I think that you can get a better return on investment and spend. The platforms out there like Chalk are amazingly affordable. They already integrate with an LMS functionality, a student management system functionality, and are already, because they're cloud-based platforms, they're far cheaper than all these server-side platforms out there. So if you're looking at, if you're in a really cost-constrained market, where it's really affecting your ability to evolve your safety performance, I'd be really looking at those sorts of functions, those sorts of initiatives. Yeah, I think that's really important, you know, from your overall strategy point of view. Lydia's got a question here. I hope I answered your question there, Pippa. With your question, Lydia, with budget set, how do we change it? It's a really tricky one, Lydia. I mean, I don't think, like with the platforms which are out there, Lydia, I'd be shocked if you're, you know, small, even if you're a small to medium-sized enterprise, that your company couldn't afford it. I mean, I don't know how many employees you've got, Lydia. That would be helpful to understand. But there are platforms like Chalk, which are very affordable. And there's others out there too. Don't get hung on Chalk, right? There's others out there that have microlearning capabilities. There's platforms out there you can bolt into LMSs. It's a bit tricky from an API integration cost and other IT sort of tech debt type issues. But platforms like Chalk, I think, I'd have to check this, and you can go onto their webpage and have a look. But I think, you know, if you've got 100 employees, it costs you like $100 a month. So it's you know, $1,000 a year roughly. I think most companies would have budget for that. If your company you're working for isn't looking at, if they're already spending tens of thousands of dollars a year on training, maybe they need to scale that back a little bit to get the outcomes they want, the outcomes they're after from a training knowledge retention perspective. We've dried up, we've run a little bit out of questions.
Excuse me, Michael.
Yes.
Tanny here.
Sorry, Tanny.
I've got a message from Shane Hodges.
Yep.
He's asking if there is less than an optimal initial retention, such as cultural barriers. Is there evidence of retention improvement through microlearning?
I couldn't answer that question. It's a very specific question. No, but it is worth exploration, certainly. But I think most companies have a culture where people appreciate investment in their learning and in their development. There's a lot of clear HR-related data out there which proves that if people are being invested in from a learning and development point of view, i.e. microlearning, that they feel appreciated, they feel like they're being respected, and that they're more likely to stay in a business. So I think there's a lot of information, particularly HR-related information out there that supports that. Pippa has got a question here. Unfamiliar with PlatformChalk. Is that for in-house building? No, it's not. It's not a shareware or anything like that. It's a set platform. The website's on the final page of this slide, this slide deck, which I believe is free for everyone to access. It's not the same spelling. It's chorck.com. Any other questions, Tanny, through you?
No, not yet.
No problems, no problems. I think that Tanny is going to be sharing this slide deck with you all, and I believe also the video of this presentation. My contact details are there. Feel free to reach out and ask any additional questions. I forgot who asked me early on, Adam, sorry, who asked for additional papers. Adam, if you want to share your email address, perhaps through Tanny, I can certainly make available to you rather additional microlearning papers so you can look at the science behind it even further. It's a well studied, it's a well researched subject. So there's a lot of pedigree there in the matter. And in the US, as I said to you, there's good 10 years now worth of development in this space. And Lydia said, I would like that too, please. No problem. I guess you're talking about the research reports, Lydia, the science papers and so forth. Happy to provide. Perfect. Quite like this software, Tanny. It's very good. All right. Well, I think we've hit a wall. I really do appreciate all of your time. I hope that was an informative presentation. I saw your text there, Bjelke. We'll get that to you. Thank you very much. I really hope for a safe 2019 for you all, and good luck with your innovations for what lays ahead. Thank you. Bye-bye.